30-year business veteran, some of the world's best-known companies, founder of Experts in How, helping family-owned businesses pass down the generations, author of The Power of Legacy, engaging generations, developing leadership, planning succession. Charlie, Leichtweis, thank you very much indeed for joining me. Welcome to the Leadership That Sells podcast, where we help you lead first and sell more with great insights and tactics from the best minds we can find. Every leader is in sales, whether you're selling products, ideas, a mission or a vision, and great sales team in particular need great sales leaders. When managers bring out the best in their teams, targets get hit on time every time without stress. But most sales leaders never learn how to lead. They wing it or they repeat bad habits and the cycle continues. Sales leaders need practical, real-world ideas that fit their busy schedules, and that's why we created the Leadership That Sells Playbook course. 9 short weeks changes your world. Check it out at the Practical Leadership Academy. And now, on with the show.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm glad to be with you.
So you try to help with Experts in How. Organizations, companies that are owned by a family, prosper, continue.
Yes.
That's kind of fundamental. And you shared a fairly scary statistic with me there for anybody who has a company under their fingertips that they're hoping to see passed down to children, great-grandchildren, etc. What was that?
Well, it's interesting because it's difficult for people to understand how to grow a family and a business at the same time. So the statistic you're referring to is less than 3% of all family-owned businesses make it to the 4th generation. And the reason for that is because the process of running a business and connecting with a family involves decision making. And there are 3 major areas where the disagreement on decision making can actually interfere with the ability to move forward. One is the purpose, which is why are we in business? The second one is direction, which means where are we going, how are we going to get there, and what's the risk involved that we are comfortable with? And the third one is legacy. And the legacy is what do we want to do for future generations to provide for future generations? Any one of those 3 decision-making areas, which involve all the processes within family or business, any disagreement on that can actually stall the process of building that business and passing it along. So what Experts in How does, we work with families to help them understand how to connect the dots between the major elements of legacy building. And the book Power of Legacy that you mentioned that I wrote, I take 6, from my experience, 6 major elements of legacy building and help people understand how to connect those. So in that 6, there's governance, there's succession planning, there's family and business architecture, there's strategic planning, etc. But there's also one called generational engagement. And generational engagement, in essence, is the process by which you understand and are able to connect all those other elements of legacy. And how that works is the family themselves, when you're running a business, it's hard to run a business and build one. It's even harder to run and build a family business because not only are you taking care of the business, you're trying to manage the family. And when you're running a business, pretty much you don't, your head's down, you're working on the issues for the business, and you forget to think about all the other people involved in the decision-making process. In a publicly held business, the other people involved in the decision-making process are the people that work there in various roles of the business. In a family business, it's those people plus all the people in the family, some of which you may not even talk to or want to talk to from time to time. So the idea of engaging the generations is to help them understand what the business is, what the business does, what it does for its customers, who are the communities it serves, and how does it help society in general going forward, and what is the benefit to the family, and what are the desires of the family to see that through. All those things don't happen like in one session or in 6 months or a year. Those are concepts and discussion points for family generations to have over long periods of time. And it can start with something simple like, okay, we're going to have a family picnic where all the siblings and all the cousins and all the spouses and stuff are together. And that's not about teaching them technical elements of the business. That's about letting them play together, let them get to know each other, letting them begin to understand what their likes and dislikes are over time, because all those elements are what feeds into elements necessary for leadership development. or succession planning. And so leadership development and succession planning are informed by generational engagement processes. As the siblings get older, they reach the age of majority, then you can begin to bring in groups of people, the adult members of the family, into more technical discussions. It becomes an element where you have plant tours or site tours of the business to show them what's going on, introduce them to the people that work there, let them see what the products are, etc. They may go out and visit customers or customer sites to begin to understand from front to back, what does this company do and who benefits from it and why is that important? The foundational block within that are the family values. So the families have decided what the values are that they want to go forward, and that's the building block on which generational engagement allows you to begin to determine these other elements. And then it connects into, how do I set up my governance structure? And it's interesting because governance is sometimes a bad word in family businesses. They're like, I don't want somebody telling me what to do. I don't want somebody looking over my shoulder and seeing my confidential information about how well I'm doing. And that comes from a misunderstanding of really what governance is. So when people tell me that, potential clients, they say, well, I understand why you say that. So my next question is, if you were buying a piece of equipment for $250,000, what process do you go through? And they say, well, we get engineers together, we look at the space, we get quotes from various vendors, we go through a process where the operations people approve it, and then eventually comes to me as the owner, and I would approve it. And I said, that makes sense, but that's the process of governance. That's decision making and approval levels. And so that decision-making process comes back to those three areas that I mentioned earlier: purpose, direction, or legacy. And so those decision-making processes have to be learned over time in terms of how the family can communicate with one another, what their skill set is in making those decisions or not, and then how do we go about improving those. And so that's how it kind of ties together. And as I said in that book, the six elements are in there individually, and a lot of people have heard any one of them. They've heard of governance, they've heard of succession planning, but they don't know how they're connected and related. So what happens is all of a sudden the founder dies. Oh, we have a succession planning problem. But at that point in time, there's no indication or no development of family members to fill that need necessarily. And so they go on and say, well, we don't have anybody. I guess we'll have to sell the business. Or we have these three people interested in doing it and they can't stand each other and they won't vote for each other. So we're not going to do it and we'll sell the business. And those are the things that interrupt what's going on. Even if you have people that are willing to go forward with the business, they may disagree on the direction of the business. I think we should grow to $1 billion. And here's how I think we should do it, through acquiring all these companies. And the other family members are like, I'm not sure I'm happy with that risk profile. I have to borrow money. I'm beholden to other people that I haven't had to before. And all those elements come about. And any of those elements are difficult for businesses to deal with. And you add the emotions of the family and whatever their history has been together, it makes it even more difficult to communicate effectively on this.
My wife is the youngest of five. So my wife has the youngest of five children, and they got on very well most of the time, sometimes not, and they don't have a family business. They have difficulty enough deciding where they're going to eat lunch when they get together.
Right.
When you talk about and these are foundational elements for any organization, perhaps not so much legacy, if you think of legacy as continuity or sustainability, but purpose, direction, sustainability, continuity, legacy in the family terms. These are fairly meaty, difficult concepts to deal with in an organization where you have, and most organizations are, dictatorial. Right? They're hierarchical, dictatorial. You do what I tell you, I'll fire your backside so far. I can't quite fire my brother.
Right.
You know, it's difficult to promote my sister-in-law sideways. So
Right.
the emotional side of that, I mean, I can see what you're talking about, where you have your family picnic. And the goal I see of your family picnic is to avoid having to do that in the first place, because you have a more coherent set of relationships that are more understandable, and the connections between each of the family members makes more sense to them themselves. Yeah. So you're
Right.
actually on a long term trajectory here. This is not something you do. If you get called in, and grandpa's on the deathbed, it's a bit late. You should have started back in 1966.
Right.
You know.
Right.
So what happens when, and I'm sure you may see lots of different things here. What happens when you get called in and you have a situation where, I suppose, the management team, the family, ain't talking? I see that a lot from corporate organizations. I go into them and there's just a misalignment. My favorite questions are to go in and say, how do you make money? Who are your customers? Why do they stay? Where do you find them? And you write that down on a nice table. And I talk to the CEO, the COO, the CFO, the CRO, the C whatever it is, and then you go down one and you see if they're different. And they invariably are quite different across the board. So that's where you start. You start with that sort of alignment.
Right.
Where do you start when they're actually related? Is it the same sort of process? You can't be quite as...
It's a similar process. I do start with surveying all the members that are involved in the need to communicate. So first of all, I first ask them, tell me who the family is. And frequently what they'll do is they'll start telling you about the people that are or have been only directly involved in the business. And so I say, that's fine. And so how about cousins? How about grandchildren? How about spouses, etc.? And I'll give you an example. One client, I asked that question, who's the family? And they said, oh, XYZ people. And it was a list of 10 folks. And then I asked the second question that I just mentioned. And suddenly the list grew to 27. Ooh. And I was asking about adults only. Right. So I said, okay, those are the folks that I want to interview. First of all, survey and then interview relative to their feelings about the business, about management, about the future, their role, their objectives, what do they see the company means to them, et cetera, et cetera. And it is a separate interview and survey process for management who are non-family members as it is for family members. And when we go through that process, that dictates the interview with the people to understand and clarify their answers. And when I ask them things like, what do you know about the business? How do you feel about the business? And they may say, I've never heard about it. I don't know. But I also ask them, do you want to know more? To really understand who's interested and to what level. That begins the process that, to your point, should have begun in 1966 on the generational engagement and talking to people about all these things. But they haven't so far today. So we got to start somewhere. And that's how we start. It's interesting because another client of mine, I went through that process and they gave me, the list of people. And I said, well, I'm going to send a survey to these people. And they said, well, that's fine. But there's one branch of the family. We don't really talk to them. We don't know what happened years ago. And you probably don't need to send a survey because you're not going to get anything back from them. And I said, well, with all respect, we actually have to send one to them and see if they don't answer or they come back and say, we're not interested. We need to know that. As it turned out, of all the people that turned in, the only branch, most everybody turned one in, but the only branch of the family that turned in 100% was that branch they said, don't send the survey to. And it's interesting, their first generational engagement meeting after that was a family gathering, nothing technical about the business. Lovely. And the CEO and chair of the board called me later. He goes, we had our meeting and everybody liked each other. He said, we got along just fine. And so a lot of times over time, assumptions can leak into the situation and people don't talk about it. And it's so important to give everyone a voice. It's not about consensus, but it's about giving everyone a voice. So you at least understand where they're coming from and what their issues are, because those ultimately will affect the ability to create a legacy, whether it's in this business or repositioning the wealth into another business.
Do you find, I think this is possibly more valid, and I've seen this a couple of times where somebody has exited a business and they've got one chap called it the big green spreadsheet. And the big green spreadsheet was basically, if he keeps the spreadsheet in green, he can pass it on to his kids. And what happened was the big green spreadsheet was very big, passed it on to the kids, and the kids basically, to use the technical term, peed it up against the wall. So with the goal of Dad was to create something that would last, passed it on. The kids basically said, wow, thank you very much indeed, gone. So you've got the creator, the entrepreneur, and then you've got the, what do you call them, profligates or whatever it is.
Right.
This legacy concept where an organization, an incorporated company, a limited company, has a duty to shareholders, has a duty to itself, really, for continuity, for this sustainability. When you add in the family mix, that duty, I think, seems to come out, my interpretation from what you're saying, it sounds like it becomes diluted with a view towards, it's not so much to the duty to itself, but the duty, or the shareholders, well, yeah, I suppose the shareholders, but a duty to the family. So the children, the grandchildren are saying, well, I just want mine. I want what's mine. I don't really care about this, just hand it
Right.
over.
Right.
How do you avoid the handcuffs? Because you see trusts, you see all sorts of different methods and models of locking things down for trying to create intergenerational wealth. Without creating the financial handcuffs or putting things in trust where they can't actually affect it, which is where you end up with professional management and trust managers and trust funds and all sorts of horrible things. I suppose it goes back to purpose, doesn't it?
It does get back to purpose. It also gets back to the idea that when people are involved, the concept of I want mine is going to be there somewhere, some way, shape, or form. And the whole issue is, at a minimum, if somebody's adamant about that, you want to know about that sooner than later. You don't want to find out about that when that person says, okay, I'm demanding you cash out my shares of this business. And the business goes, well, wait a minute, the cash I would need to do that would cause me to force to sell the business. And so understanding that that's on the table and people may want to get to that point is something that you can plan for. So there's a way to create funds. What in some cases, with respect to stockholders, is a buyback fund, and some portion of the money that would be used for dividends is put aside each time as a fund to potentially buy somebody out if they have to be bought out or want to be bought out. We have a case of that, and another client is run by a company run by three brothers and an uncle. The uncle is much older than the three brothers, or his nephews basically. And he ended up never having kids. And as he got older, he also fell into ill health. And all of a sudden he pounded his fist on the table and says, you have to buy me out. I've worked in this company for 40 years and I've created wealth. I want my piece of it. And they couldn't afford to do that with respect to the cash that would be required. And they never set aside that relative into the amount of money or the disbursements that they were going to put aside for the shareholders all along. And they could have done that in the meantime. Now, we ended up talking him out of that and created a settlement over time process for him that would work. But that subject came up like out of the blue to the three nephews. And that, the whole idea of that coming at the last minute out of the blue, I mean, lawyers, there was threat of lawyers being involved, and that right away would have destroyed the company. So at least understanding these things, it's not that they go away by talking to each other. I mean, Susie pulled my hair when I was 12 and I'll never forgive her for it. So that stuff doesn't go away necessarily, but understanding that it exists and continually exploring it and asking those people what their opinion is. And sometimes you get past it because their initial desire for I want mine is because they don't trust anybody else potentially, or they think that they're entitled to it in a way that means that they're going to go off and do something very selfishly for it. And they need to understand that's not for the betterment of the entire family. And they may come out of it. So again, there's some that you're not going to come out of it. And there's some you can come out of it based on conversation and understanding of what they need and going down a path that begins to provide some of that for them.
I mean, it's a negotiating tactic. There's irrationality, right? You want to confound somebody. You say, well, we have to do it by Wednesday because I promised my wife. What? The heck's that?
Right.
That's in my head now.
Right. And then sometimes other generations pick up the pieces. Another client had who was in business for 74 years. And the founders came over as immigrants to the U.S. and established this entertainment process and provided for people in a fabulous way for many, many years. Well, the fourth generation sons decided, well, they looked at the business and what they saw was their Ferraris. They wanted Ferraris. And so they went out and bought Ferraris. And then they went out and bought a building to house the Ferraris, to display them. And the cash drain on the business they executed to do that put the business out of business, at least until the fifth generation came along and decided to revive it. But those things happen. And without knowing that in advance, you can't plan or try to mitigate it if you even can do that. over time. And that's one of the things. So there's some companies that aren't going to be able to survive no matter what. But many times when that communication is open and that understanding is open, things can be done differently.
Again, you're going back to purpose. You're going back to the family picnic. You know, we're family. We get together every year and we talk about this and we come together because this is what we do. We are the family that does this thing so that we can provide for. You know,
Right.
if you have enough people bought into that purpose, that's your goal.
That carries the day.
Yeah.
And just one more time, the foundation for that purpose is the original family values and how those values evolve over time. They'll evolve a little bit, but those family values are something that they need to hearken back to. The purpose has to have values attached to it. What is our purpose? Why are we here? And it's founded in those values. So it's important for those to be established. It's important for those to be carried on and communicated through the generations.
Yeah. When I talk to organizations, and many of them have the values painted in the wall, or worse, you have them laminated in a dog tag around your neck, right? They're not living. The values that work, that I find, can be used as a decision-making tool.
100%.
Yeah. I want to do this. Yeah, not really, because it's not an entrepreneurial task, or it doesn't lead with the heart, or whatever the heck the value is. It's a decision-making tool, it's rather than just something fluffy and nonsense. And that takes a lot of work.
It's constant work, and that's why generational engagements is a process that it's never too late to start it, but it also never ends, which is fine. And one of the things that's tied to that is the concept of not only what the purpose is and what those values are, but the question is, what do we want to provide going forward in the future for this family? And it relates to the ultimate question, which comes first, the business or the family? And the answer that most people don't like, but is actually the best answer, is the business comes first. And the reason for that is that if the business is there to provide for the family, and if the business doesn't come first and is not there, it can't provide for the family. So that's really where people have to get their heads to. Even if I want something today, if the business doesn't exist tomorrow, I'm still not going to get it. But I at least have a chance of getting it if the business gets. So again, you can negotiate, as you say, with the concept of, even if it's for something for you, this is how it has to get there.
Yeah. So you want the Ferrari? You gotta work.
That's right. That's right. Right. You aren't going to be able to afford it or that building if you don't make this work. And they didn't see that, and it failed.
Excellent. Excellent. Is there a particular message that you would pass to people who are working in their business right now, and they can see, I mean, you talk to startup, scale up folk, and you say, look, this is going to take 7 to 10 years before you get anywhere. And a lot of the times they're building businesses to sell.
Right.
I think increasingly it's moving, the world that I'm floating around in is moving away from taking that incredibly expensive venture capital loan or exiting off to private equity to actually building something that's profitable and sustainable and growing, and provides for the people who work there, provides for the shareholders, the stakeholders in the wider family. Is there a particular message that you would give to them to have them lift their chin and look at the horizon, rather than look at the shorter term, the potential gain? Because you could gain many millions of pounds, dollars, yen. But what can you do to have them lift their horizon? What message would you give?
That's a great question. It's sort of the $64 million question, as they say, how to get people to lift their heads. And it goes back to making sure that there is a discussion and you put it in writing what the purpose is. Their understanding of the purpose of that business will help dictate, again, some of the decisions on direction. So if they have a purpose of XYZ that is fairly short term, then the direction is going to dictate a short term plan. And they'll be able to see that by laying that out. So you lay out the strategic plan. It's a short term plan. Here's what you can do within that plan. Here's the financials. Here's the marketing. Here's whatever that goes into that. And that's it. And if that's acceptable to you, then they can. On the other hand, here's the alternative to that, which has a longer term view, and here's what that looks like. and let them decide. All you can do is present the scenarios and do as best you can in forecasting it or helping them forecast it so they can make that decision. Somebody ultimately may come back and say, you know, I don't, I just don't want to wait 7 years. I just don't want to wait 10 years. You know, that's not in my head. So, and the other thing is some people, you know, they react the way they've been treated in the previous generation as well. If somebody treated them poorly and didn't ask them for their opinion and didn't value their input to the process of what we're doing here, they're going to possibly do the same thing. And so breaking that cycle again comes through appropriate generational engagement discussions. You may find that all of the cousins said, you know, we understand what's going on here, but we really think here's some other ideas on how to get there. And we'd really like to have input to it. And the person who never asked them may say, oh, maybe that is something we should consider. It's all relative to the discussion and emotions. If somebody's set in their ways on what they do or don't want to do, then that's going to be a self-fulfilling prophecy. So it's important to say, how do we understand everybody's voice and then use that input to consider what direction we're going to choose based on the purpose. And I know that sounds like more words than a spreadsheet answer, because there's no spreadsheet answer to that, quite frankly. There's spreadsheets you can create based on the scenarios you describe, and financial analysts and other people can help you try to put the numbers to paper based on what you're describing. But it has to start with a common understanding of what do we really want as the purpose here? What is the time horizon people are willing to accept, et cetera. And then the question is, make sure people don't understand they don't have to make the decision for all time today. There's ways to pivot, and there may be reason to pivot. You may be in one business and you may pivot to another business as a result of the economy, as a result of regulations, whatever. The ultimate example of pivoting is a story about a gentleman named Alfred Noble. And I don't know if you know this story, but Alfred Noble invented dynamite. And so he became extremely wealthy. And as the story goes, his brother died in France, and the French newspaper mistakenly thought his brother was Alfred. So they wrote an epitaph that said, "The merchant of death has died." And when Alfred saw that, he was, oh my God, that's what people think of me? That's my legacy? I do not want to have that. So he said, I'm going to sell all my holdings, take all my wealth, and put it into something that's going to benefit society going forward. And he did that. And that was the birth of the Nobel Prize. And so, you know, courses are not always straight, if you know what I mean.
What is the idea? Yeah. Man plans and God laughs.
Yes.
That's
yes,
it.
exactly. It's not always our journey.
No. Well, there is a plan, but it's not necessarily ours. That's the thing.
Right.
Excellent.
Right.
Excellent. Charlie, where can people find you when they need you?
Our website is expertsinhow.com, expertsinhow.com. You can find me on LinkedIn as well under my name. I don't, when this is published, I think the spelling of my name.
And the links and all
yeah, great, perfect.
All that good stuff.
And so you can reach me that way as well. And I'm always, interested in what gets me up in the morning is helping people. So I'm always interested in having a conversation with anybody who has questions about these processes or what they're going through. And I like to listen to them to understand what their issues are first. And then I can determine whether I can do something to help them or if I know somebody that can help them.
Can't ask for more than that. Charlie, likewise, thank you very much indeed for joining me.
Thank you for having me. I really enjoyed it.